today. We will get started in a few moments. Good afternoon and welcome everybody to today's webinar hosted by ECIS. ECIS is the Educational Collaborative of International Schools, established for 55 years as a not-for-profit organisation. We have over 500 members in 78 countries. My name is Georgie McIntyre. I am the Chief Learning Officer at ECIS, and it is my pleasure to introduce today's webinar. We will be sharing a recording of today's webinar, and there will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions via the chat box. We will be monitoring these throughout, and please feel free to answer your questions there. We will also be sharing a copy of this presentation after today. Schools around the world are investigating how best to reopen in the fall, ensuring that they are meeting the highest standards of safety and continued quality of learning, while adhering to the regulations established by various governments and health authorities. Spain is one of the countries hardest hit by COVID-19, and Madrid, one of the hardest affected regions in the country. The American School of Madrid continues to navigate an ever-changing landscape as it plans for the future of its students and school community. In this webinar, we will walk participants through the process we are following to prepare for a very uncertain future. Please now let me introduce the team from the American School of Madrid. Kim Cullen is with us today and is the American School of Madrid's Upper School Director. She has 23 years of experience in international education, having served in school communities in a variety of capacities. Kim's professional profile is comprehensive, with experiences in visioning, strategic planning, relationships, team building, and compassionate leadership. Ben Weinberg took a decidedly different career path to arrive at his current position of headmaster of the American School of Madrid. Ben left college after 3 semesters, determined to leave school behind. Education found him when he volunteered to read aloud to a student at Vermont Elementary School, first as a one-to-one aide for an emotionally disturbed boy. Ben found himself drawn back to education and has never left since. Jesus Iravedra is the Director of Administration Services in the American School of Madrid. He is also in charge of managing and maintaining the facilities of the school, and he coordinates the health and safety programs for the staff. Please join me in welcoming and handing over to Kim, Ben and Jesus. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you, Georgie. I think we were expecting to introduce ourselves, so it's kind of nice to have our bios read out, isn't it, Ben and Jesus? It's a different experience to have somebody talk about you. No, Georgie, thank you for having us today. I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to highlight some of the challenges that we're going through at the moment, but also some of the strengths that we're discovering as we go through those challenges. Yeah. And I just want to say that this team that is with you today is only part of the team. We're just part of the bigger team, and we'll talk a little bit about the other people who are involved in it as well. So I think with that, why don't we just launch into today's purpose? And Georgie, you had a poll that you were going to launch. Do you want to go ahead and roll that out?
Yes, I will do. I'll share that with everybody now.
Okay. So while that's going out, thank you everybody for joining us today. I think Joe said that we had about 125 participants expected.
Yeah, that's correct. Often,
and so it's,
yeah, I would say, Kim, often people actually watch the recording afterwards when they've got time to access it in their own sort of time. So thank you for everybody who's attended today as well.
Right. So our poll question is, as your school plans for reopening in the fall, where are you in your process? And as those are coming in, it looks like they're sort of landing right in the middle of it, which is where we are too. So that's really appropriate and relevant to us in this presentation. So let me just jump into the purpose. We're all in the same situation, aren't we? We've done so much research on how to reopen school in the fall, because you know, there will come a time when our kids have to go back to school, and we've got to get back to whatever the new normal looks like for our respective contexts. When we first started talking about this as a team a few weeks ago, we were all invited to do tons of research. And what we were finding was, you know, through webinars and research and other schools' plans, we found that we kept seeing final products, which can be really daunting, because what we're seeing is the product and not the process that schools have to go through to get there. And you can kind of guess in your head how they might have gotten there. But we wanted to actually highlight, because we are currently in the thick of this right now, just like so many of the people who are responding to the poll. The process that we're going through, and it's not a pretty process. You know, there's no clear direction necessarily, and no clear answer on what the product will look like. We do recognize that there may not be a single right answer, that some of the best laid plans that we've seen from other schools and examples that we've seen in webinars may be perfect for those contexts, but not necessarily ideal for our context. And so we've had to do a lot of personalization of the pieces that we've seen elsewhere. And I did mention before that the three of us that you see on the screen here, we're really only part of the team. Our educational leadership team consists of the three of us, plus my counterparts in the middle school and the lower school, our admissions director, our head of technology, our ed tech coordinator, our Spanish ministry liaison. We're a large team of people who are all focused on various aspects of this plan. So we're really here just in representation of the work that we're doing at the moment. We talk a lot about silver linings at the moment with this whole pandemic. A lot of goodness has come out of it, obviously at the expense of some pretty horrific results. But one of the things that we do appreciate is the fact that we've become so much more connected. And, you know, I know that all of us are reaching out to our colleagues around the world and talking about the challenges that we face. And so part of our purpose here today too is to really just share in that conversation and continue the conversation around, you know, our common goals and our common challenges. So that's just kind of the overview. I think we can probably close the poll at this point. So we'll share the results. Can people see that, Georgie?
I'm hoping people can see that. Just bear with me one moment and I'll restart it again.
Okay. Okay.
Can you see that? Yeah, attendees are now viewing. So
great.
We have 13.
Great. So,
can you see that as well, Kim?
I can, thanks.
Yeah.
So 13 are just starting, 13% just starting, 72% are in the thick of it, just like ASM. 13% have made the big decisions and are just ironing out the details, and 7% are ready to go. Well, kudos to those of you who are ready to go. Well done. Okay, so I'll go ahead and close that. Can we close that, Georgie?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And then, so just to give you a little bit of background about the American School of Madrid, as Georgie mentioned, I have 23 years experience in international education, and all 23 of those years have been at the American School of Madrid. So I have a particularly unique view of the school and its history and its context. We are a K-12 international school with an enrollment of just under about 1,000. Our community is more or less evenly split between Americans, Spaniards, and third country nationals. And our teaching staff is about half US and half from Spain and other countries. Just to give people a little bit of context about our situation here in Madrid, as you mentioned before, Georgie, Spain is one of the areas in the world that was hardest hit, and it was at the top of the list. We were topping the charts for a while. Within Spain, Madrid was definitely one of the two regions that were hardest hit by COVID. We found out on March 9th that we would be required to close schools, and our school closed on March 11th, and Spain's state of alarm, state of emergency began on March 15th. Schools are essentially closed until September, with very few exceptions. And on May 4th, the government began After monitoring closely the numbers, the process of de-escalation, which crossed four phases and was expected to take 6 to 8 weeks. Because Madrid was one of the hardest hit, we took the longest to go into phase 1. So we started phase 1 on May 25th, 2 weeks after the rest of the country. And the expectation, fingers crossed, is that we'll be able to go into phase 2 next week. But it is just a game of wait and see often, and it's like playing a game and having the rules change on you from day to day. And so that's a little bit of the guideline that we've had to follow as we've created started to create our plans for reopening for the fall. So just a little bit about our process, and this is really sort of a zoom out overview, because this was the intention when we began to do our planning. You can see it's sort of a modified design sprint, if you will. We were, intending to do some research and then confirm our values. What were the things that we really wanted to be able to uphold as we began our planning, do some iterating, and then some evaluating, and then some reiterating, make some decisions, and then communicate those to our constituents. And it hasn't gone quite so smoothly or beautifully because of the fact that things changed. And so we're going to walk through sort of each of those stages with you so that you understand exactly what we faced and where we are and what we've learned. And Ben, I think I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Kim. So in terms of talking about the research, Kim mentioned early on about the level of collaboration that's been between schools around the world, and it's really been unprecedented. It started when schools began to close, and we're looking at how they might implement virtual learning, and virtual learning plans were shared that way, and connections were established. And we've been incredibly lucky in that sense, because rather than just researching, we get to call upon the experience and sometimes the beginning stages of experience and draft plans from other schools, and the openness with which schools are sharing and putting that out there and giving to one another has been an incredibly, it's been one of the silver linings of this whole experience. We've also benefited from the support from the Office of Overseas Schools through the U.S. State Department, and the regional associations have also stepped up and played an enormous role, like ECIS, in hosting webinars, in connecting schools with resources, and we've been lucky in that regard with the Mediterranean Association of International Schools and their support. We also had another aspect that really has helped me in particular, is that we had established a collaborative of schools in Spain and Italy a couple of years ago, sharing professional development and sharing resources around that. And that has played out, before we met as heads of school and brought some of our staffs together once or twice a year, and now we're meeting once a week. And that level of being able to share, being able to talk through of that sort of real time, how are you doing it? How is it working? How are you solving this problem? Has been immensely helpful. We sort of have become a team of researchers, far flung and spread out, but nonetheless connected and with common objectives. And in addition to that, we've looked at models from CDC, from the World Health Organization, and some different research organizations as well with their recommendations. So it's a blending of the science, of the practical experience of schools involved and at different stages of planning throughout the pandemic that has supported our ability to do research with an admittedly small team. I mean, Kim talked about our larger team, but we're still, we're not a school that has a heavy administrative structure, and our research and our process has been without the benefit of an external facilitator. And so it's knowing that you have partners in the endeavor is extremely supportive and gratifying. Otherwise one would feel very much that one was going through it completely on one's own. So in our next phase of our process, we went to look at our values. And in doing that, we looked at what has worked and supported us and helped us in the whole implementation of virtual school and what has been our foundation. So we took a moment to reflect as individuals on the team about what we've learned in terms of what's worked and supported us and made our work possible in this very difficult time. And then we took, if we had been in a physical room together, we would have had Post-it notes and dots and could have moved it all around on chart paper and used the walls in that. We hadn't yet experienced Jamboard, which we now have used in some other workshops. So we did this in a more old-fashioned conversational way of just looking at where there were collections and intersections and commonalities in our beliefs. And we came up with a set of core beliefs, which have sort of been the foundation and framework from which our planning has grown. And you can see on this slide, you can see that at the top, safety, health, and well-being, number one. Then maintaining the depth and the quality of learning experience. Through all of this, keeping alive, it's so easy to have these kinds of difficult times separate us, but keeping alive the sense of being a K-12 school, which is something that we clearly valued. Making sure that there was honest and clear communication about where we were, and giving choice and voice where we can to the members of the community. And finally, we felt it was important to have sort of the elements of a growth mindset, that the idea of we were going to look for opportunities, we were going to maintain an attitude and a perspective of optimism, we were going to look and value flexibility. And flexibility is one of those things that everyone promises in every job interview we've ever been involved in, but this kind of experience in these times demand it at a much different level than we're usually used to delivering flexibility. Flexibility in terms of thinking outside the box, flexibility in terms of what roles and responsibilities we might have, flexibility in reaching out for different perspectives and getting feedback at different points as we go. And so the next one is Iterate, and
I'll jump in there, Ben.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So once we were able to sort of identify our common values and those things that we were really committed to preserving, each of the divisional directors really spent a focused amount of time trying to figure out what reopening could look like. And there were all different kinds of considerations that we had to go through in those various models. A number of different options to share with one another, and then go through the process of evaluating those using a set of criteria that Ben had shared with us. And what we realized was that was such a complex process because there were so many things that we didn't know about the decisions that the government would make and the restrictions that we would be faced with. But just as an example, with the upper school, and I can tell you upper school and middle school, we have some structures in common. We have a shared bell schedule and some shared spaces. So we looked at things like an alternating schedule depending on grade levels. We looked at changing our bell schedule completely, reducing class sizes, shortening the school day. We explored how to do a blended program with, some brick and mortar as well as some virtual learning, knowing all the while that as committed as we are to reopening, there is the very great possibility that we may have to reclose again based on all the information we're receiving about possible resurgence of the virus in the fall. And so our planning needed to have built into it a lot of intentionality and at the same time a great deal of flexibility. And then, our hope really is to have a clear understanding from the government, hopefully by the end of June, regarding what those restrictions could be. But I can tell you some noteworthy rumors that we're sort of facing at the moment are the possibility of an inclination to limit class sizes to 15, the possibility of ensuring distances between students of 1.5 to 2 meters. And so these are some of the pieces that really have to play into our planning as we create schedules and classroom sizes, and they all have implications that look a little bit different at each level, high school versus middle school versus elementary school, because of the respective age groups and their ability really to put those restrictions into place. Since we found that evaluating really wasn't going to be possible because it was really difficult for us to put together a clear plan, what we began to do was pool all of our resources into a single place where we could share those together. The research that we had done, the ideas that we had, that we had pulled from other places, and we created a kind of slide deck where each slide really focused on were the values, assumptions, and challenges, some of which we've already mentioned, things like operations, the cafeteria and the buses, facility use. I mentioned before, looking at classroom sizes. Just an example of that, each of our teachers is scheduled with 5 of 8 possible classes at the moment. In middle school and high school, each of our classrooms is open 1 to 2 periods during the day. If we have to go to reduced class sizes and we have to spread things out, then we would need to make maximum use of our facilities, which obviously has implications for staffing as well. There are liability and risk issues, and Jesus will talk to you a little bit more about those later on, and obviously the health and safety priorities, PPE, cleaning, which needs to take place a number of days. We remain committed to maintaining a high quality program where teaching and learning continues to happen, whether we're in school or out of school, whether we're in smaller classes or larger classes. And we want to make sure that the learning environment is conducive to a positive experience. And those are all parts of our planning as well. Those have implications, of course, for curriculum instruction assessments. We've got to continue our focus on professional development in the area of virtual schooling, because again, we understand that it may be a very real possibility that we'll go back to that. And then of course, and this should probably be at the top of the list, which is the social emotional considerations, working with students after being away for 3 months, helping them prepare for the possibility of a resurgence, working with our constituencies, the parents, the teachers, the students on building resilience and dealing with needs that happen as they come up. So there's a lot that goes into this plan. And I think all of this started to emerge as we started to iterate, and we realized this is not a direction that we can continue to move in before we stop and pause and reframe our thinking.
So in terms of evaluating, when we got to the level of having our values and our assumptions, that was shared with the community, so they would understand where we're coming from and where some of the areas of impact might be. We needed people to have a heads up in that regard. And it wasn't at that point in the form of a plan, but as a former commercial fisherman, it starts to be your course, it's your heading, and you can see the direction in which you're going to be moving. Because in all of this, you can't wait until there's certainty. You can't wait until all the information is in. At that point, you'll be starting flat-footed, and we know what happens to runners when they start flat-footed. You have to be in motion in order to be agile, and that agility and that momentum are really key factors in being prepared for what's going to be, in terms of what are the range of possibilities that we're looking at. We also noticed that we're going to have to be, in that sense, then continuing to evaluate probability as we go, and not spending energy and time reacting to what may turn out to be trial balloons that are floated by politicians, by the Ministry of Education. There's a lot of speculation out there, and it's easy to get knocked off course by reacting to each one of those variables as it comes into play, because at that point, it is uncertain, it is unclear, and people are feeling their way through this as well. And trying to keep a steady eye on the most likely way through all this becomes a skill that probably they don't teach in any courses, but certainly has been something that we've all learned as we've gone through this, and all of practice catching one another when we start to go too much in detail along a path that may end up being a complete dead end not too far down the line. And that sort of, that makes, if we sort of go down to the next iteration and decision aspect of this, that need for agility, that need to keep a balance between certainty and confidence. It's a messy process. It isn't simple. And in some ways, we are incredibly lucky because we're not like some schools facing reopening. Some of you may have seen, schools in other areas that are doing what they're calling emergency learning, where they've reopened sooner. And that's a very different stance to be in now than we will be in September. Right now, we were just talking in our leadership team meeting about staff who are understandably nervous after all they've gone through to come back to clean out their rooms before the end of the school year. And it's, if you've been in your apartment and haven't been out, you've been disinfecting your supplies from the grocery store and all of the things that we've been exposed to. Only certain times people are allowed to go out of the house for walks, all of that. To suddenly come back, one feels a little raw, exposed, vulnerable. And so in a sense, we're lucky that looking ahead to September, people will have had the experience of going to a cafe, of having a coffee with a friend, of doing some things that are more normal. And some of this vulnerability and unease and anxiety will have been alleviated. It's also now that we're starting to have kids who are able to go out with their parents, they're going to the store. So that idea of sanitizing your hands, putting on gloves, wearing a mask, doing those things are not going to be as frightening as they might be for students who suddenly get thrust into the school without any experience of that. And it's like moving overseas. When you go back home, you suddenly realize how much you've changed. And sometimes it isn't until we go back to school. When we go back to school, it'll just be like always. And that sort of culture shock of going back to a familiar place and finding that it's changed can be very disconcerting. And so when Kim mentioned the need to support people socially and emotionally, that's something that we're very, it's one of the things that we're holding on to very clearly as we go forward in this. And we're lucky that our plan will have people slightly desensitized in a positive way to some of this kind of exposure. And finally, the idea of communicating. As I said, we've communicated our assumptions and our values with the community. People are understandably want to know, so what's it going to look like? What's the plan? It's that need for certainty in uncertain times is extremely strong. And what we've sort of set the tone for with the communication all through this is being able to delineate what we know and what we don't know. And so we can be clear about where the variables are. And the other sort of key consideration that we're finding in communication is getting the communication at a just right level. It's a little bit like a just right book for an early reader. You don't want it to be too easy. You don't want too little information. You don't want it to be too hard, too complex, too much information. And so getting that balance, which will shift over time, is really important. We had developed a plan and I had spent quite a bit of time on it. It was 30 pages long. The leadership team looked at that on Monday and said, no way, that's way too complex. It'll be overwhelming for people at this time. So we geared it down to look at what are the key areas where people need to know something and what specifically do they need to know. And so our goal is to then take those areas and share them a little later this week with focus groups, both of parents and with staff, so we can get feedback on where our information is either too light or too heavy. and then be able to have that handbook or that plan go out to the full community, one version to staff for the things that they're more focused on, and one version for parents and students for the areas that they're most are most important to them, most pertinent to them, and have that go out by mid-June or sometime next week. And so we're moving on now to some of our considerations and assumptions.
Okay, I will jump in, Ben. So I'm going to talk about some assumptions and some considerations that have affected this process. You are going to hear some ideas that was presented by Ben and Kim, but I think it's interesting to repeat the ideas because it affects the process. The first consideration we have to take into account is that is the country our school is operating. The American School of Madrid is located in Spain. Spain has been one of the most affected countries in the world by the COVID-19. According to the Spanish government, Spain has over 278,000 confirmed cases of COVID, being the fourth country in the world in terms of people affected by this virus. Madrid is the most affected region in Spain, having the 25% of the total reported cases in Spain. As Kim said before, on March 15, the government declared the state of alarm, and it seems that it will continue until June 21st. So it will be 98 days of lockdown with some adjustments that started on May 4th to de-escalate the confinement. The first date we have been able to go back to school was last Monday, June 1st. According to the information we have at this moment, there will be no in-person classes until next school year, except perhaps for those students who require some additional support and for those who are going to prepare for the university exams. But there is nothing confirmed yet. The level of uncertainty is very high about this and next school year. The second consideration is that we have to follow and will follow the health and safety guidelines coming from the government, and also will follow the recommendations from the Madrid region about how schools will have to operate in what has been called the new normal. In this scenario, our assumptions are health and safety are paramount. What does it mean? The school wants to create a safe environment for the students, teachers, and families. This is the main variable we have to consider when analyzing the scenarios. We need to create the safest possible environment that we can. What type of measures we are considering? Okay, we are going to provide teachers and staff personal protection equipment on a daily basis during the school year. Personal protection equipment may include a mask, a pair of gloves, and a plastic face shield. Some of you may have heard that gloves are not recommended. Okay, masks were not recommended 2 months ago and now are mandatory. So we have to be ready to provide at least, or to have at least a minimum of stock of gloves just in case we have to provide or we want to provide these gloves to the staff and faculty. There will also be hand sanitizers all over the school, as well as disposable tissues, and we will encourage teachers and students to wash their hands regularly. We have put posters in every classroom and in the hallways, remembering the students and staff the importance of washing hands. We are going to modify our cleaning routines during the day. This could imply disinfecting some areas after each use and increasing the number of cleaning staff during the school day. We are now working to figure out how the new normal would impact some shared areas that are used in the school, such as gymnasiums, the cafeteria, the libraries. We are also considering changes in the way the students and the teachers are going to enter the campus. We are considering having different entrances and exits and staggering students to prevent crowded spaces during the day. We are considering having a separate area in the nurse office for those who are not feeling well and where where there is a suspect of having symptoms of this virus. We will follow the Ministry of Health protocols in those cases. So these are the main measures we are considering about health and safety for students and staff. But what about physical distancing? I'm going to talk about the process we follow to find out how to deal with this issue. There have been many messages from the authorities and experts about physical distancing. The first thing we heard is that no more than 15 students could be in the same room at the same time. We know that this is not affordable for the majority of the schools in Spain. Then we have heard that there needs to be 2 meters between students, then 1.5, and also we have heard that there could be classrooms where students will be separated 1 meter and have to wear a mask during the school day. We have even heard that in-person school will be on a voluntary basis. So there is no official rule at this moment for schools about physical distancing. It is suspected that the authorities will finally publish some guidance for schools in Madrid in July. So about the process, we have divided the leadership team into smaller groups and have assigned some key tasks to them. One of the groups was called Reopening ASM September 2020. In each group, we have been looking for official information from other schools, information from the unions, and also private school associations in Spain. At the beginning, we started working on different scenarios for the reopening, but then we realized that it was better to set some assumptions, create what we think it will be the most probable scenario, and then apply the what-if analysis. For example, one of the key assumptions we've made is that it will be necessary to have physical distancing between students. And then we have the what-if analysis. What if it's 2 meters? What if it's 1.5? What type of measures we will have to apply if it's 1.5 or 2? If there will be enough space in each classroom, and some other questions like this. We are going to work over the summer to prepare the classrooms for this new normal, assuming that there will be guidelines for physical distancing, but also some room for flexibility. We have identified some shared spaces that could be used as flexible spaces for those classrooms that won't fit the requirements. And what about outside the classrooms? Well, there should be some changes in the way the students are moving in the school. We are installing floor marks to direct foot traffic flows, and we are considering limiting the usage of shared spaces during the school day. For example, lockers use may have to be limited to maintain distancing, and also schedules may have to be adapted to prevent an excessive number of students going to the lockers at the same time. The cafeteria is a big area of concern. We are working with the subcontracted cafeteria company that provides the lunch service to understand how the cafeteria will look like in September. They will work with us during the summer to find the best way to provide a good lunch program while protecting students and staff. Table density will probably be reduced, and using different temporary spaces like gyms or multi-purpose rooms could be an option. Self-service will not be allowed, and disinfection procedures will have to be increased during the day. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk about some other assumptions that we are considering in our process. Kim, would you please go to the next one? Okay, well, no, don't worry. As I said, there is no official information yet about the next school year, and most families are waiting for the school plan about the reopening. There are many questions we cannot answer because this is an unexpected and unprecedented situation. We think that by September, people will be more used to the new situation, but we also think that there will be families that will have some concerns when sending their children to the school. We will need to be prepared for that situation in September. Also about teachers and staff, particularly employees who are at risk because of health issues. We will provide them the personal protection equipment we mentioned, but there will be cases when the teacher will suffer the fear that we all have suffered sometime during this pandemic, and we will need to address that. One thing we are considering is about teachers and students rotating from classroom to classroom. It seems that it will be easier if the teacher moves from one class to the other and the students stay in their seats than students moving from classroom to classroom. Obviously, there will be situations where this is not possible. For example, science rooms or laboratories or music classrooms. But the impact of moving teachers will be lower than moving a whole class at the same time from one place to the other. The cleaning and disinfecting process will also be easier in that situation. And then finally, each division at ASM is different and have different schedules. They use different facilities and has different buildings. The divisions will have to adapt their schedules according to the new normal, trying to create the safest environment we've talked at the beginning. Virtual learning is less disrupting in higher grades than in lower grades, and each division should be prepared to deal with a new lockdown, be ready to move to virtual learning again with short notice. And linked to the next slide that is about final takeaways. I'm going to start with my lesson learned here and was related to something that Ben was talking about a couple of minutes ago. The level of uncertainty is too high and we cannot wait until the last moment to adapt the school to this situation. I think one of the key points in this process is that we have been able to set what we've called the most probable scenario after a lot of research, and then start moving and preparing alternative plans. If you wait to have all the information, it will be too late. That is my takeaway of this analysis. We have to start moving because otherwise we will be late. So that's my part.
Thank you, Jesus. I want to apologize to everybody because I think my internet keeps messing up the slideshow, and I apologize for that if that's the case. It seems like we're moving forward now. So my final takeaway from this is really a combination of the part about teamwork and also there's no way that just a couple of us could have put together all the thoughts and ideas around how to move forward. And what we've really done is sort of a divide and conquer. We've all taken responsibility for our respective areas, but the other part of that teamwork is being able to come back and bounce ideas off of a group of people and being able to challenge one another and really help fill in the blanks and round out information has been so critical in this process. And I think having, one of the divisional directors, our head of school, and our business manager in this presentation gives you a sense of how critically important that team was for our process. The other part, I think, that has been a real takeaway for me has been the importance of really timely communication. We have talked a lot about what is the right amount of communication and when do we communicate with families. And I noted that Ben mentioned earlier that as soon as we decided on our values, the ones that we were going to hold close and dear, that we're going to guide our process, we communicated those to our families and to our teachers and students. It's been really critical to be able to provide our community with the right amount of information at the right time, because as Ben mentioned earlier, the lack of knowledge, the lack of information generates fear, stress, anxiety, and ultimately mistrust. And so it's been really important for us to be able to keep our community in the loop as much as we could as we were, moving through the process.
And so to close out from my perspective, it was an observation that one of my colleagues in Barcelona made a week ago when we were meeting, and he remarked that leadership has shifted during this whole experience, and what's called for from leaders was different in the first few days than it was then in the second or third week, which is different than as we sort of realized that we were in this for the longer haul instead of just a short-term turn in the road. And now even new demands are placed as we look ahead for the implications going further. So that the need for leadership to adapt its stance, to utilize different skills, to become knowledgeable in areas that none of us thought we would need to be knowledgeable in, to be on 24/7 for an extended time, that this has become a key feature, and that sort of what I said earlier about the need for flexibility applies equally to leaders being flexible and not having one stance, but being able to adopt the stance and the skills that are necessary at a particular stage of the progression of a situation. The situation is dynamic and fluid, but it does follow a progression, and understanding what's necessary at that time has been an important learning and an important thought for me. So I guess that brings us to the part of questions that we might have.
Thank you all so much. For me, I think that's been very, very powerful presentation on sort of the journey that you've been on, and also the progress, and we're only halfway through that. There is a real sense, I think, it is unknown. We don't know what's going to happen. It is a messy process, and I feel that you have certainly set the tone here today. We have got a few questions, and please, everybody, feel free to continue to ask questions of the panel. Thank you all so much, though, initially for your thoughts and sort of how you've actually gone about approaching this process. You mentioned sort of early on that you looked at many different types of models of sort of schooling, and you've adopted a sort of a blended model. Can you explain a bit more why you've adopted that one, and which one you have favoured?
So every school has different circumstances, different resources, and different aspects that they are holding on to in their planning process. And they're also under different, as Jesus mentioned, they're under different mandates from their respective countries and the cultures that those countries are embedded in. And so one can't just take a model from somebody else off the shelf and necessarily employ it. One has to look at the components of it and where it fits and where it doesn't fit, and look for some of the commonalities between the different models, and how and the level of creativity that schools have used in solving some of the similar problems that they have. There are schools that are looking at this situation as an opportunity to move forward with change, so that things that we thought we would never maybe be able to do are suddenly things that we need to do. There are lessons that were learned in the virtual learning environment that have big implications in terms of teaching practice. Teacher portfolios, using video, flipped learning. These are all things that schools have been working on, and now suddenly they were absolutely necessary to put into place, and teachers have picked up and started to use those skills. So rather than picking a model, one is looking for where is the maximum benefit from the lessons learned, from the different ways that people have innovated and solved problems, and where can we find the ones that will fit for us.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. We've also got a question from Anna. How are you dealing with parents' concerns and complaints? Because obviously there's a level of reassurance required here. How are you actually going about addressing those?
Well, we talked a little bit about communication and the importance of timely communication and timely addressing of parents' concerns. I mean, the most important thing is that, and I'm sure Ben can speak much, he can probably speak volumes to this one, but we're all sort of fielding questions and issues that are brought up in the different divisions. And the most important thing is that everybody is going through something that's unprecedented and unusual and unforeseen. And so there's a lot of patience and understanding and compassion and listening. Often when parents come to us with concerns, first and foremost, they just want somebody to talk to. And I think we've all had some really honest heart-to-heart conversations with families throughout the last 3 months when issues came up. And again, that timely communication is the most critical piece in this. We probably can't answer everybody's questions and problem solve the way everybody would like for us to be able to. But we really do, we've been doing our best to sort of meet parents in the middle where we can, and where we can't, give them an ear and let them have a voice and let them know that we do care. And Ben, what would you add to that?
I think the aspect of listening is huge. It's easy to, if somebody has a problem, and I had this realization not that long ago, it's probably been easy for us in the past, or easy to fall into the idea of labeling somebody as being difficult, instead of saying this is someone who's having difficulties. And leaning in to difficult conversations. We've talked as a leadership team about going past the uncomfortable part, which means you're going to tackle subjects and topics and considerations that maybe one would feel uncomfortable addressing, but being able to move past that and hear what somebody is truly saying and looking for those solutions. We put into place, we've done some surveys, particularly with lower school parents, to find out where they were having the most difficulties, because the switch for younger students and parents being at home with the pressure of having to do their work, plus having their children home, plus being the one who's sort of responsible suddenly for motivation, accountability, and all those things with their kids, with learning happening at the home, have been really hard. It's not an easy thing. I failed as a parent miserably when my daughter was young, being her teacher. I could be dad, but I couldn't be dad and teacher. And so having empathy for that situation and understanding what some of the parents' main concerns were, and then with our director of teaching and learning and some others, designing a set of parent workshops that helped give parents some skills and strategies, has proved to be a useful thing to do, and something that I think we need to do much more of as we go forward.
That sounds like a really interesting approach, actually, Ben. I was going to ask you, how have you actually, what tools have you used to communicate out and reassure the community? So yeah, it would be interesting to just touch on those a little bit more. Sure.
I mean, so I think we found that the static kinds of communication tools, documents, frequently asked questions, those serve up to a point. But in a time when people are isolated and separated, the thirst for connection, for someone to talk to, for families that have been shut up for literally weeks at a time with young kids, the thirst for adult conversation is huge. And so finding ways and using the tools now, like we're doing now, we're able to connect with colleagues and hear one another and connect with our communities in ways that we didn't have before. And I can see using these tools continue to being used to allow greater participation in presentations, in parent-teacher conferences, for example. It relieves the pressure of having to come to the school in order to do something, and says, we can connect with you where you are, which is a very different communication in itself, just in the medium of communication. Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, we've experienced that from our organisation's perspective, and having to quickly shift from what was going to be a very productive face-to-face leadership conference in 5 weeks, having to convert that to
sort of a virtual environment that's interactive and that you know, our delegates could still embrace and enjoy. One of the questions we've got here actually is around supporting teacher development during these times. Have you had any sort of strategies or approaches from the teachers' side?
I'll jump in. So one of the things for me that's been gratifying, as you remarked in the introduction, I left traditional college after 3 semesters. I was not interested in sitting in a classroom, and I ended up getting both of my degrees through non-traditional means, online as well as self-paced learning. And so seeing teachers say, well, I can't go to New York to go to Columbia Teachers College, but they're offering these online, has suddenly, to me, that's gratifying. It's people reaching out for the experience and the set of skills and the opportunity to practice those skills. And it takes the trip out of the equation. And I think that's open things up. I mean, it's come, as you said, with your conference, it's come out of necessity. Mm-hmm. We can't do that. People are going to be reluctant to fly and travel now. And so the wealth of webinars, of people being able to participate. The other really gratifying shift has been in the level of coaching opportunities, particularly teachers who are videoing themselves giving a mini lesson. Suddenly they're able to pass that video on and get feedback from their peers, feedback from an instructional coach. So it has opened us up to collaborative and collegial sharing and interactions at a level that was much more difficult to sustain, even when we happen to be right next door to one another. It's been one of the great ironies that the level of connection and sharing and passing on tips and strategies has grown at a time when we've been further removed from one another. And it's born, like the expression says, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. People needed this, so they reached out for it, and people who had it were happy to share. And that willingness to share, along with the need, has been a very powerful motivator and sustainer of professional growth and learning.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I think that probably wraps things up today, but I really genuinely am so grateful for the three of you to kind of give your thoughts and your sharing and being actually very open and honest about, it's not, you haven't got all of the answers, however you're sort of walking through that process and accepting that you're going to need to be adaptable, and it's requiring a lot of different flexibility and agility skills that perhaps we've never needed to use before in the new world. But thank you very much. We're really, really grateful to the three of you, because we are conscious of your time and taking you away from your other sort of wider priorities. And I'm sure that the attendees would agree today that it's been really, really insightful. I will just mention that this is just a series of free webinars that we have at the moment with ECIS. Please go onto our website. I will share that when we actually share out the recording and the presentation as well. You're free to register them. You can circulate that across the community. We're having people join from all over the world to these events, and it is about being collegial and connecting and sharing where we can. So we're truly grateful to the three of you for taking the time to join us today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Georgie. We appreciate it.
Take care. Take care.